She walked in as a nobody, a lone witness set to be crushed by a corporate giant. But when forced to remove her jacket, a forbidden tattoo on her arm made the judge freeze. A ghost had returned. The Honorable Sterlingwood courtroom was a chamber built to intimidate. Dark mahogany walls seemed to absorb all sound, smelling faintly of old paper and the bitter polish used to maintain a century of gravitas. The air, thick with the scent of stale coffee and the anxious, hushed whispers of lawyers, felt heavy, charged. Among the stream of defendants in ill-fitting suits and their frantic attorneys, Elara Vance moved like a stone in a river. She entered alone, her gait measured, deliberate. At 38, her sharp, piercingly blue eyes held a weariness that contrasted with the strength in her posture. Her deep auburn hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples, pulled back in a severe, functional knot. She wore a faded brown tweed blazer, slightly too large for her frame, as if she'd recently shed a weight she never intended to lose. The security checkpoint, a minor hurdle for most, became a point of friction. The guard, a young man with bored eyes, did a double-take at her ID. "Purpose of your visit, ma'am?" "Witness for the prosecution," Elara replied, her voice soft but perfectly steady. He frowned, his gaze flicking from her ID to her face. "No attorney with you?" "I don't need one." Something in her placid certainty made his boredom curdle into suspicion. He studied her for a moment longer, a flicker of unease in his eyes, before waving her through with a grudging nod. Inside the courtroom, the tension was a physical presence. The trial of Aegis Dynamics had been front-page news for weeks. The multi-billion-dollar private military contractor stood accused of excessive force leading to civilian casualties during unsanctioned operations in the contested region of Zorovia. Behind a fortress of expensive lawyers, Aegis executives sat with the relaxed confidence of men who believed themselves untouchable. Elara took her seat in the witness waiting area, hands folded calmly in her lap. She was designed to be overlooked, a footnote in a high-stakes corporate trial. Nothing about her screamed that she was about to detonate a bomb in the heart of the American justice system. When Judge Wallace entered, the courtroom rose. A former Marine JAG officer, Wallace was known for his ironclad control and no-nonsense demeanor. He ran his court with military precision. The prosecution calls Elara Vance to the stand. Elara walked forward, her steps even, took the oath without a trace of emotion, and sat. Prosecutor Anya Sharma, a rising star in the Justice Department, began. "Please state your name and occupation for the record." Elara Vance. "I was a humanitarian aid coordinator in Zorovia from 2015 to 2018. Julian Thorne, Aegis's lead counsel, was on his feet instantly. His slick-back hair and impeccably tailored charcoal suit radiated a predatory arrogance. "Your Honor, we question this witness's credentials. What can an aid worker possibly know about military operations?" He punctuated the question with a condescending smirk. Judge Wallace's eyes narrowed. "She is here to testify about what she personally witnessed, Counselor." "Proceed, Ms. Sharma." For the next hour, Elara's testimony was a masterclass in detached precision. She described a village obliterated not by insurgent IEDs, as Aegis claimed, but by surgical strikes. She recounted finding bodies arranged in a manner inconsistent with a chaotic battle. On the courtroom screens, her photos appeared, graphic, undeniable proof of the carnage. "And you're certain it was Aegis personnel you saw?" Sharma asked. "Positive. Their equipment, their vehicles, their protocols. They were not regular military." No further questions. Thorne approached the witness stand like a wolf circling its prey. "Ms. Vance, you claim to have been at these coordinates on June 17, 2018. He gestured to satellite imagery on the screens. "Then perhaps you can explain why these images, from that exact day, show no aid workers. In fact, they show active insurgent cells, making it impossible for you to have been there." Elara didn't even flinch. "Those aren't the correct images." A murmur swept the courtroom. Judge Wallace leaned forward, his voice sharp. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Vance. The satellite pass over that region on June 17 was at 14:32 local time. The shadows in your images indicate mid-morning, not mid-afternoon. They're either from a different day, she paused, her gaze locking with Thorne's, or they've been digitally altered. Thorne's smirk faltered. A crack in the perfect facade. The first sign of blood in the water. Julian Thorne scrambled to recover his composure, his face flushing a blotchy red. Your Honor, the witness is engaging in baseless speculation. She's an aid worker, not a meteorologist or an intelligence analyst. I don't need to be, Elara stated, her voice cutting through his bluster with chilling calm. I just need to know how to read a map. And a clock. Judge Wallace stared intently at the screen, his military background kicking in. He saw it, too. The angle of the shadows was wrong. Fundamentally wrong. His gaze shifted from the doctored image to the woman in the witness box. Who was she? Mr. Thorne, the judge's voice was low and dangerous. Can you verify the authenticity and timestamp of this evidence for the court? Immediately. Thorne conferred in urgent, frantic whispers with his team. The Aegis executives were no longer relaxed, they were leaning forward, their faces tight with alarm. One of them was frantically trying to text under the table, his thumb jabbing at his phone. After a tense minute, a junior attorney handed Thorne a file. We stand by these images, Your Honor, Thorne stammered, his earlier confidence shattered. But we can provide additional verification after the recess. You will, Judge Wallace said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He then turned his full attention to Elara, his eyes narrowed in a new, intense scrutiny. Ms. Vance, as per standard security protocol, I must ask you to remove your blazer. The request was routine, but the timing felt anything but. The air in the courtroom became still, every eye fixed on her. This was no longer about procedure. It was a test. Elara rose slowly. With a deliberate, almost ritualistic gravity, she unbuttoned the worn tweed blazer. Her movements were fluid, devoid of any nervousness. She was not a victim being forced to comply, she was a soldier preparing for inspection. She shrugged the blazer from her shoulders, letting it fall onto the back of her chair, revealing a plain, long-sleeved black shirt beneath. She then, without being asked, rolled up the sleeve of her left arm. And the courtroom fell into a collective, silent gasp. There, on the pale skin of her forearm, was a tattoo. It was small, stark, and utterly out of place, a stylized black raven, its wings forming a broken circle around a single, stark white star. The silence was absolute, a vacuum where sound had ceased to exist. All the tension, all the whispers, all the legal maneuvering vanished, sucked away by the sight of that impossible ink. Judge Wallace's face drained of all color. His hand, which had been resting on his gavel, went limp. The heavy wooden mallet slipped from his grasp, landing on his desk with a loud, echoing thud that made everyone flinch. He stared at the tattoo, his mind clearly reeling, trying to reconcile the symbol with the woman in front of him. He leaned into his microphone, his voice a choked whisper that was nonetheless audible in the stunned silence. That's not possible. Chaos erupted. Thorne shot to his feet, his face a mask of panic. Your Honor. We demand an immediate recess. Right now. The Aegis executives were in disarray, one scribbling furiously on a legal pad, another staring holes into his lawyer, his mouth agape. Court is recessed until 1000 hours tomorrow, Judge Wallace announced, his voice strained, automatically reverting to the military time he hadn't used on the bench in years. He pointed a trembling finger at Elara. Ms. Vance, you will remain available to this court. As the room began to empty in a confused frenzy, two men in dark, severe suits materialized at the back doors. Their faces were emotionless, their eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Elara. They started to move towards her, their steps synchronized, but were intercepted by court security. In the midst of the turmoil, Prosecutor Anya Sharma rushed to Elara's side. "What in God's name just happened?" she whispered, her eyes wide. Elara finally met her gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of something raw and weary showed in her eyes. "They finally realized," she said quietly, "who I really am." An hour later, Elara sat in the solemn, wood-paneled expanse of Judge Wallace's chambers. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Only Anya Sharma and a stoic court security officer were present, the doors firmly locked. Judge Wallace sat behind his heavy desk, his judicial robe discarded, looking more like the Marine officer he once was. He steepled his fingers, his eyes never leaving the tattoo on Elara's arm, which she had not bothered to cover. "That insignia," the judge began, his voice tight, controlled. "It belongs to a unit that was officially disbanded over 30 years ago. Spectre Division. Spectre Division was officially deactivated in 1991, Your Honor," Elara corrected him calmly. "The key word is, officially, dot. Who are you?" Wallace demanded, the question raw. Instead of answering directly, Elara reached for the simple satchel she'd carried into court. From it, she produced a slim, unmarked folder and slid it across the desk. "This is classified several levels above your current clearance, Judge. But given your prior service in the Corps, and the current circumstances, I believe you have a need to know." Wallace opened the folder. As he read the single page inside, his expression grew increasingly grim, the color draining further from his face. The document was a ghost, an authorization memo that shouldn't exist, detailing the reactivation of a unit that was, for all public purposes, a myth. "This says Spectre Division was brought back online in 2003, he murmured, his voice hollow with disbelief. "For off-the-books operations. In places America officially had no presence," Elara confirmed. And Aegis Dynamics was one of the private firms contracted to sanitize the evidence when operations went sideways. As she spoke, a memory, sharp and unwanted, pierced the sterile calm of the chamber. The taste of dust and cordite in Zorovia. The ruins of a medical clinic. She was holding the dog tags of her second-in-command, the metal cool against her palm. Around her, Aegis contractors in their sterile tactical gear moved with cold efficiency, bagging evidence, erasing footprints. They weren't soldiers mourning the dead, they were a cleaning crew scrubbing a crime scene. One of them looked at her, his eyes empty. "Just following orders," he'd said. "Why are you here alone?" Judge Wallace asked, closing the folder with a snap that broke her reverie. "Where is your chain of command? Dead? Compromised? Or unwilling to acknowledge our existence?" For the first time, a fissure appeared in Elara's iron composure. A deep, profound grief flickered in her eyes. Someone has to speak for the ones who can't speak for themselves anymore. As she talked, Anya Sharma began to notice things she'd missed. The precise way Elara sat, angled to face the door, never letting it out of her peripheral vision. The network of faded, silvery scars on the backs of her hands, consistent with years of tactical handling of weapons and gear. The way she unconsciously addressed the judge with a deference reserved for a commanding officer. Suddenly, in the middle of a sentence, Elara was seized by a racking cough. It was deep and violent, shaking her small frame. She bent over, one hand pressed to her chest, her body trembling with the effort. She reached into her blazer pocket, which lay on a nearby chair, and pulled out a small, unlabeled pill bottle. With a practiced motion, she shook 2 tablets into her palm and swallowed them dry, her jaw tight against the pain. Anya stared, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "You're ill." Elara straightened up, taking a slow, controlled breath. She didn't deny it. The look in her eyes was confirmation enough. "Those men," Anya said, her voice low, remembering the menacing figures in the courtroom hallway. "The ones who tried to approach you. They weren't here to protect you, were they?" Elara finally looked away, her gaze drifting towards the window and the city beyond. "No," she said, her voice flat. "They're here to make sure I never testify again." The next morning, the courtroom had been transformed. The public benches were gone, replaced by grim-faced military officers in dress uniform and severe-looking government lawyers. Armed federal marshals stood at every door, their presence an overt display of force. Judge Wallace entered, his expression like granite. Before we proceed, the defense, now joined by the Department of Justice, has filed an emergency motion to exclude this witness and seal these proceedings on grounds of national security. A new attorney stood, exuding an aura of immense, untouchable power. Maxwell Thornton, Department of Justice, Your Honor. Ms. Vance is a purveyor of fantasy who is attempting to disclose state secrets that could endanger this nation. Judge Wallace looked at Elara. Ms. Vance, in light of these grave allegations, the court must ask you again. Who are you? The room fell silent. Elara rose to her feet. The subtle, civilian slouch she had adopted vanished. Her spine straightened, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. The transformation was absolute. The aid worker was gone. A commander had taken her place. Commander Elara Vance, she announced, her voice ringing with an authority that defied challenge. Spectre Division, Special Operations. Honorably discharged, 2018. She placed a sealed folder on the evidence table. This contains the operational logs of Operation Shadowfall, the mission Aegis was hired to bury. It includes the names of 37 Zerovian civilians and 5 American operators they murdered to hide our government's presence in a region where Congress had forbidden military action. Thornton leaped to his feet. This is outrageous. This woman has no authority. She has every authority, a voice boomed from the gallery. An older man in the impeccable uniform of a 4-star general stood, commanding immediate, undivided attention. General Marcus Maddox, former head of Joint Special Operations Command. Commander Vance was one of the finest officers I ever had the privilege to serve with. If she says Aegis executed civilians to cover their tracks, you damn well better believe it's the truth. The courtroom erupted. Thornton demanded the room be cleared. The Aegis lawyers huddled with their clients, whose faces were now masks of pure terror. Through the chaos, Elara stood at attention, her eyes locked with Maddox's in a silent, profound exchange. That night, in a secure hotel room guarded by U.S. Marshals, Elara sat by the window, watching the street below. Her phone, a burner, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Coyote is in town. The old watering hole. 2100. An hour later, she slipped out, her security detail following at a discreet distance. The bar was a dingy, forgotten place, smelling of spilled beer and regret, a haunt for veterans with ghosts in their eyes. A man sat in the darkest corner, his back to the door. You look like hell, Commander, he said softly as she sat. It was Coyote, a former Spectre signal specialist she thought was dead. Coming back from the grave takes its toll, she replied. He slid a small, heavy-duty thumb drive across the sticky table. The original, unaltered satellite feeds from June 17th. And the comms logs from the Aegis tactical team. They knew there were no insurgents. They knew. How did you get this? She breathed. Spectres don't leave their own behind. You're not alone in this, Elara. Too many of us are too scared to come forward. But not you. It wasn't a question. I have less to lose, she said, pocketing the drive. It was the final nail for Aegis's coffin. Back in her room, another wave of pain crashed over her, more intense than before. She doubled over, gasping, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of a table. She wrote it out, her body trembling, her vision blurring. When it subsided, she straightened, her face ashen but her eyes blazing with resolve. She plugged the drive into a secure laptop. Not yet, she whispered to the empty room. Not until it's done. The next day, the courtroom was a fortress. Windows were covered with heavy steel plates, cell signals were jammed, and the air was cold and still, the only sound the low hum of the ventilation system. This was a place where secrets came to be buried or born. Elara entered in a wheelchair, and 4 ports still taped to her arm. She looked fragile, but her blue eyes burned with an unyielding fire. Judge Wallace nodded to her, a deep, quiet respect in his gaze. "This proceeding is now classified top secret/SCI, he announced. "Disclosure of any information spoken here is punishable under the Espionage Act. Commander Vance, you may proceed." For the next 2 hours, Elara laid out the entire conspiracy. She presented the unaltered satellite imagery from Coyote's Drive. She played the communications logs, the courtroom listening in horrified silence to the Aegis team leader's voice, cold and clear: "Site must be sanitized regardless of occupants. Complete the objective." The case was airtight, damning. But the most powerful testimony came last. From her lap, she lifted a tarnished chain of military dog tags. She held them up for the court to see. When Aegis was ordered to sanitize the site, she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room, that included eliminating all witnesses. Both local survivors, and the members of my team who objected. She removed the first tag from the chain and placed it gently on the witness stand. Lieutenant Ezra Blackwood. Killed while trying to shield 2 children with his own body. She placed down another. Captain Soren Khalil. Executed while rendering medical aid to a wounded village elder. Another tag joined the rest. Her voice began to tremble, but she did not stop. Sergeant Leo Viking Chen. He always kept a picture of his daughter taped to the stock of his rifle. Aegis shot him in the back. With each name, a piece of her composure seemed to chip away, revealing the raw grief beneath. General Maddox rose from his seat and stood at rigid attention. 2 other high-ranking officers in the room silently followed his lead. Finally, she placed the last tag on the stand. "And Major Leona Frost. My second in command. My friend." She was shot while confronting the Aegis commander face-to-face. She finished the list, her hand gripping the edge of the witness stand for support, her breathing shallow. The 3 officers, led by Maddox, rendered a slow, perfect salute. After a beat, Judge Wallace, the former Marine, stood and joined them. Elara, from her wheelchair, returned the salute, her first openly military gesture of the trial. Julian Thorne, desperate and cornered, rose for his cross-examination. He knew he couldn't fight the facts, so he attacked the witness. "Commander Vance, you have terminal cancer, do you not? With perhaps only months to live." "That's correct," she answered, her voice a thin whisper. "And you blame your condition on chemical exposure during a classified mission the government denies ever happened?" "It's the truth." Thorne leaned in, his voice a venomous hiss. "Isn't it more likely that this entire story, this grand conspiracy, is nothing more than the desperate fantasy of a dying woman? A final, vengeful act against a system you feel abandoned you?" The accusation hung in the dead air, ugly and obscene. "If I wanted vengeance, Counselor," Elara replied, her eyes locking onto his, "I would not be in a courtroom." She pushed herself up, trying to stand on the force of her indignation alone. "I am here for..." Her words cut off. Her eyes widened, a look of shock replacing the fire. She gripped the witness stand, her knuckles turning white. She swayed for a moment, a silent gasp on her lips, and then, her body gave out. She collapsed, crumpling to the floor in a heap of worn tweed and unbreakable will. "Medic!" Judge Wallace roared, his voice cracking with alarm, as court officers rushed to her side. Elara's collapse forced a resolution. Faced with irrefutable evidence and the public relations nightmare of their star witness dying after being savaged by their lawyer, Aegis Dynamics folded. In a series of frantic, closed-door meetings, they agreed to a plea deal. Days later, in the secured courtroom, their CEO and top operational directors pleaded guilty to a list of charges, including unlawful use of force and obstruction of justice. The most serious charges, the murders, were addressed in a sealed addendum. General Maddox delivered the news to Elara in her hospital room at Walter Reed, where her status as a decorated officer had finally granted her the care she'd long been denied. "It's a victory, Elara," he said gently. "Aegis is finished. Their government contracts are being permanently revoked. The families of your team will receive full honors and benefits. We did it." She was weak, propped up on pillows, but a faint, peaceful smile touched her lips. "It's not enough," she whispered. "But it's a start." A week later, a classified ceremony was held deep within the Pentagon. The families of the fallen Spectre operators finally heard the truth and were presented with posthumous silver stars. Elara attended in her wheelchair, a silent, triumphant observer. Afterward, she spoke to each family, sharing a personal memory, giving them back a piece of the hero they had lost. 3 weeks after that, Commander Elara Vance died in her sleep. Her official obituary was brief, mentioning distinguished service but nothing of Spectre Division. Yet at Arlington National Cemetery, beneath her name on the simple white headstone, the insignia of a raven in a broken circle was quietly engraved. In the months that followed, change rippled through the system. Congress passed a sweeping set of new regulations for private military contractors, nicknamed by insiders, the Vance Protocols. The Department of Defense established a new, powerful oversight committee for classified operations, known internally as the Eclipse Committee. 6 months after her death, Anya Sharma, now heading a special task force on contractor accountability, visited Arlington. She found Elara's grave, and noticed she wasn't the first visitor. A small, newly minted Spectre Division patch was propped against the headstone. A groundskeeper told her they appeared all the time, left by quiet, military-looking men and women who came to pay their respects. The fight wasn't over. As she stood there, her phone rang. It was an anonymous, encrypted call. "This is Sharma." The voice on the other end was hesitant, scared. I served with Commander Vance. She said if anything ever happened, she said you were the one to trust." Anya straightened, Elara's example a burning ember in her mind. Her war was over, but the echo of her courage had just begun a new one. "I'm listening." Elara's war ended, but her fight ignited a spark. A reminder that one voice, even a fading one, can echo in the halls of power. The system is vast, and accountability is a battle fought daily. What do you think? Can one person truly make a difference against a corrupt system? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And please, comment with respect for the complex issues we've discussed. If this story moved you, consider subscribing and sharing it, so more hidden truths can find their light.